Ryle stood alone in the observation chamber, her small frame barely visible against the massive viewport. Outside, the trade station Meridian 7 hung in the darkness of space like a jeweled crown, its lights reflecting off her tired face. She had been working on the device for 3 years. 3 years of calculations, failures, and nights spent in the laboratory while the rest of humanity slept. Now, the moment had finally arrived. The crystalline weapon lay on the table behind her. It did not look like a weapon at all. To most eyes, it appeared to be a piece of beautiful art, a geometric structure of interlocking crystals that caught the light and threw it back in rainbow patterns. There were no obvious barrels, no visible energy cells, no threatening appearance that would mark it as something dangerous. This was both its greatest strength and its greatest weakness. Ryle had learned long ago that beauty could be deceiving. The negotiation was scheduled to begin in 2 hours. She could already imagine the looks on their faces, the delegation, the creatures who had conquered half the known galaxy through raw strength and intimidation. They would see her device and laugh. They always did. Humans were young compared to the elder species, barely 1,000 years into their journey among the stars. To the who had dominated the galaxy for 50,000 years, humanity was nothing more than a curious novelty. A soft chime echoed through the chamber as someone entered. Ryle turned to see O approaching, his tall figure moving with the practiced grace of a diplomat. He had been her friend since their academy days, and he had supported her crazy ideas even when the military council had dismissed them. Now, he carried the weight of representing humanity's interests in this delicate negotiation. "How are you feeling?" he asked, coming to stand beside her at the viewport. "Nervous," Ryle answered honestly. "They are not going to take this seriously." "You might be surprised," O said, but even he did not sound convinced. "They are aggressive, but they are not stupid, when they see what that thing can do." "If they see what it can do," Ryle corrected. "They are going to dismiss it the moment we walk into that room. I have read their reports. Their military commander, Ara, has conquered 43 worlds. 43. What could possibly intimidate someone like that?" O placed a hand on her shoulder. "That is exactly why you built this, because sometimes intimidation comes from understanding. Strength is not always about size." Ryle nodded slowly. She wanted to believe him. 2 hours later, she stood in the grand negotiation chamber, the crystalline device resting on a pedestal between two delegations. On one side sat the human representatives, O. Ryle, and a handful of diplomats and military officers. On the other side, there were only 5 of them, but their presence filled the entire room. They were massive creatures, their bodies covered in thick chitinous armor that gleamed under the artificial lights. Their heads were angular and alien, with compound eyes that seemed to see everything at once. 4 arms, each one powerful enough to tear through steel. These were predators that had never known defeat. Ara sat at the center of the delegation. She was larger than the others, her armor darker and more elaborate. The antennae on her head moved slowly as she surveyed the humans with obvious disinterest. Beside her sat a younger warrior with a cruel edge to his movements, was already watching Ryle with something that might have been contempt. "The coalition has agreed to hear your proposal," Ara said, her voice deep and resonant. The universal translator converted her clicks and hisses into standard English, but it could not hide the dominance in her tone. "We have already offered to allow your kind to continue existing in your colonial territories. What more could you possibly need from us?" O stood and bowed respectfully. "We are grateful for this opportunity, Commander Ara. Humanity comes before you today with not just words but with something tangible. We wish to propose a mutual defense agreement. In exchange for your protection, we offer something no other species has been able to develop." "And what could that possibly be?" asked, his 4 arms folding across his chest. His tone made it clear that he had already made up his mind. Whatever humans offered, it would be worthless. Ryle stood slowly. Every eye in the room turned toward her. She was small compared to the fragile-looking in her simple uniform. She said nothing as she walked to the pedestal and placed her hands on either side of the crystalline device. "This," she said quietly, "is a weapon based on harmonic resonance theory. It operates by generating targeted frequencies that can manipulate matter at the molecular level." Ara's compound eyes blinked slowly. "It is a pretty stone. Does it sing?" Several of the warriors made sounds that might have been laughter. Even some of the human delegation members seemed uncomfortable, uncertain. Ryle felt her chest tighten, but she kept her expression calm. "It does more than sing," she said. "It listens." "Enough," said, rising from his seat. "I have seen enough of this display. Humans, you insult the Coalition by bringing us children's toys and calling them weapons. You are fortunate that Ara has decided to tolerate your presence. Do not test her patience further." Ryle watched as walked toward the pedestal. He was deliberately approaching the device, his body language making it clear that he planned to take it, to destroy it, to demonstrate his contempt for human engineering. "I would not recommend that," Ryle said softly. Paused. For just a moment, something flickered across his alien features, perhaps surprise that a human had dared to speak to him with such certainty. Then, his features hardened again, and he reached out with one of his lower arms to grab the crystalline device. Ryle's fingers moved. She had set the calibration weeks ago, prepared for this moment. The device activated, and suddenly the negotiation chamber filled with a sound that no one else could hear. It was not a sound that came from speakers or from the air itself. It was a frequency that attacked the nervous system directly, that found the precise vibration that made their exoskeletons sing with agony. Screamed. The sound that came from his throat was unlike anything the humans had ever heard, a sound of pure, primal pain. He fell to the ground, his massive body convulsing as his own skeleton turned against him. Two of the other warriors rose to help him, but the moment they moved closer to the device, the frequency found them too. They collapsed beside their companion, their bodies racked with involuntary tremors. Ryle did not increase the intensity. She let the frequency wash over them for just 3 seconds before she released the activation sequence. The chamber fell silent. For a long moment no one moved. No one spoke. Ara sat motionless on her seat, her antennae completely still. Her compound eyes focused on Ryle with an intensity that made the air itself feel heavy. Then slowly, Ara rose to her feet. And for the first time, Ryle saw something in the commander's eyes that she had never expected to see. Fear. The medical bay of Meridian 7 was a place of controlled chaos. 3 warriors lay on tables designed specifically for creatures of their size and physiology. Medical teams from multiple species worked frantically to understand what had happened to them. The physicians moved with a precision that bordered on violence, their movements sharp and decisive as they scanned and analyzed their fallen soldiers. Ryle watched from a secure observation room on the upper level. She stood perfectly still, her hands folded in front of her face a mask of calm. Inside, her heart was racing. She had expected the weapon to work, but she had not expected the fear that would come with actually using it. She had not expected to see a creature as mighty as a warrior reduced to helplessness in mere seconds. O entered the observation room quietly, closing the door behind him. His face was flushed, and he looked both amazed and troubled. "They want answers," he said. "They want to know the mechanism of the weapon, the frequency specifications, everything. Ara is demanding a detailed analysis, or she is threatening to end the negotiations entirely." "Let them demand," Ryle said calmly. "The weapon will not be shared. That was the point of this entire demonstration." "Ryle, do you understand what you have done?" O asked, his voice urgent. "You have made the afraid. A species like that does not respond well to fear. They respond to it with violence." Ryle turned to look at her friend. His concern was genuine, and she appreciated it. But he did not understand what she had truly accomplished. They respond to dominance, she said quietly. They recognize only strength. For 50,000 years, they have conquered every civilization they encountered because they were stronger. They were faster, more brutal, more willing to destroy. But strength is only one thing. Intelligence is another. And sometimes, intelligence creates tools that make strength irrelevant. Below them in the medical bay, the three warriors were beginning to stabilize. But something had changed in them. Their movements were cautious now, almost fearful. Their antennae twitched constantly, as if they were listening to something that no one else could hear. The pain had faded, but the memory of the pain remained, burned into their nervous systems at a level deeper than conscious thought. This was the true nature of predator psychology. A predator's body contained millions of years of evolutionary programming. Predators understood threats at a cellular level. They could sense danger the way other creatures sensed hunger or thirst. And Ryle's weapon had triggered something primal in them, the ancient recognition of an apex threat. In the negotiation chamber, Ara paced back and forth like a caged creature. Her antennae moved in agitated patterns, and her four arms kept clenching and unclenching. Around her, the remaining warriors maintained absolute silence. They had seen what that pretty crystal device could do. They had witnessed their brothers brought low by an invisible force that their armor could not stop. A communication arrived from the human delegation. Ara listened to it twice before responding. When she finally entered the negotiation chamber again, O and Ryle were waiting for her. "Your weapon," Ara said, her voice lower than before, more careful. "You claim it is a deterrent." "I claim nothing," Ryle answered. "I have simply shown you what it can do." The commander was silent for a long moment. Ryle could see the battle playing out behind those compound eyes. Ara was trying to understand what had happened, trying to reassert her dominance. But the device had already done its work. It had spoken to the most primitive part of the brain, the part that recognized death and understood fear. "How many of these weapons do you possess?" Ara asked. "Enough," Ryle said, which was technically not a lie. She had 7 more in secure storage. Ara's antennae drooped slightly. It was a gesture of submission, though she would never admit it in words. What she was experiencing was something that had not felt in thousands of years, genuine uncertainty about the outcome of a conflict. If humanity possesses this technology, and if this technology is truly as effective as your demonstration suggests, then the balance of power in this region has shifted, Ara said slowly. The coalition does not negotiate from positions of weakness. "Neither do we," O interjected. "Humanity is not interested in war. We are interested in partnership." But even as he spoke the words, Ryle understood the truth that hung unspoken in the air. This was not partnership. This was a new form of deterrence, a way of saying that humanity could no longer be conquered through simple brute force. They could invade human space, but the cost would be devastating. And they, for the first time in 50,000 years, had to consider the cost of their actions. Ara studied Ryle for a long moment. The human woman did not look like a threat. She was small, frail by standards, and possessed none of the physical attributes that they valued. Yet this small, seemingly harmless human had created something that made them nervous in a way that nothing else could. "We require more information," Ara said finally. "Your people will provide full specifications of this weapon. My scientists will analyze how it was developed. Then, and only then, will the coalition consider your proposal for a mutual defense agreement." Ra'el shook her head. "The specifications remain with humanity. What we are willing to share is this. Any species that threatens human interests will discover what your warriors have experienced. That is the entirety of the information you need." It was a bold move, and O's expression suggested that he was barely containing his alarm at her boldness. But Ryle knew what she was doing. She was not appealing to the sense of honor, because they had no honor. She was appealing to their sense of self-preservation. She was forcing them to understand that continuing hostilities with humanity would result in pain and death, with no way to prevent it. Ara's mandibles clicked together slowly. It was, Ryle realized, the equivalent of deep thinking. This device, the commander said, exploits a weakness in our physiology that we did not know we possessed. That makes it dangerous in a way that conventional weapons are not. A weapon that exploits physical structure we can defend against or adapt to. But a weapon that attacks the nervous system itself, that attacks the very mechanism by which we understand and respond to threats, that is something else entirely. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a weight that had not been there before. You have given the Coalition something to think about, Ryle of humanity. That alone is remarkable. Whether it is a threat or an opportunity remains to be seen. As she turned to leave the negotiation chamber, Ryle noticed something in the way Ara moved. It was subtle, but it was there. The Predator's gait had changed. Where once there had been absolute confidence, there was now a hint of caution. The commander had begun to understand that sometimes the most dangerous weapons were not the ones that looked dangerous at all. Minna sat in the analysis chamber, surrounded by holographic displays that showed complex data streams and frequency patterns. She was Ryle's senior technical analyst, and she had devoted the last 3 years to understanding the weapon's mechanics. Her sharp eyes moved rapidly across the displays, absorbing information with the speed of someone whose mind had been trained for exactly this kind of work. The impact is worse than we thought, she said without looking away from the data. The frequency doesn't just cause physical pain, it actually damages the neural pathways. Look at this section here. She pointed to a series of readings that showed the nervous system in microscopic detail. The damage was clear, not the kind of damage that could be healed easily, but the kind that would leave lasting scars on a biological system. Ryle stood beside her, watching the data unfold. She had known the weapon was effective, but seeing the actual measurements of its impact was somehow different from theoretical calculations. It was one thing to understand a concept on paper. It was another thing entirely to see the reality of what she had created laid out in front of her in such precise detail. They will recover from the physical damage, Minna continued, but the psychological damage, that is something else. The brain has evolved to process threats in a very specific way. Their predatory instincts are hardwired at the deepest level of their consciousness. Your weapon doesn't just hurt them physically. It rewrites their threat assessment system. It tells their brains that they have encountered something that can kill them, something that their armor and strength cannot protect them from. Is that permanent? Royal asked. I believe so, Minna said. At least, it will be for some time. They will need generations to psychologically adapt to the idea that such a weapon exists. In the meantime, their survival instincts will continue to scream a warning every time they get close to your device. Ho, the captain of the human security detail, entered the analysis chamber. He was a tall man with the bearing of someone who had spent decades protecting others. His expression was thoughtful, but slightly troubled. The security team is requesting access to all areas where the additional weapons are stored, he said without preamble. They claim they need to verify the storage conditions. I have the request, but Ara is pushing hard. Deny it again, Ryle said firmly. The weapons do not leave human hands, not now and not ever. They are not going to accept that for long, Ho warned. Ara is a military commander, not a diplomat. Eventually, they will attempt to take what they want by force. Ryle nodded slowly. She had anticipated this as well. There were a species that had always solved their problems through dominance and conquest. They would not tolerate the existence of a weapon they could not control or possess. That is why we need them to understand something, Ryle said. The weapon is not just a tool. It is an extension of human innovation. It is proof that our species possesses capabilities they did not expect. The moment they try to take these weapons by force, they will trigger every defensive protocol we have in place. and they know what will happen if they do that. Later that evening, Ryle was called to a private meeting with Aura. The commander sat alone in a chamber that had been specially prepared for her comfort. The space was large, with reinforced furniture designed to support her weight. When Ryle entered, Aura's compound eyes fixed on her immediately. "Sit," the commander said, gesturing to a chair that had been placed across from her. Ryle sat, maintaining perfect composure. She had trained herself to control every micro-expression, every sign of fear or uncertainty. To the showing weakness was the same as accepting defeat. "You did not invent this weapon," Aura said without preamble. "I have had my science team analyzing the theoretical framework, the mathematics, the understanding of harmonic resonance. These are not human discoveries. They are old. They come from my people." Ryle said nothing, which was its own form of answer. "You found old technology," Aura continued, "and you reverse-engineered it. You took something that my people abandoned thousands of years ago and transformed it into a weapon that we fear." Still, Ryle said nothing. "Why?" Aura asked, and the question seemed genuine. "Why did you do this? You are not a warrior. You are a scientist. You created something that could kill my people, and you did it knowing that we would have almost no defense against it. Why would anyone do this?" Ryle finally spoke, her voice calm and steady. "Because your people were taking our worlds. Because your people were treating humanity as though we were resources to be extracted, not as a species deserving of respect. I created this weapon because sometimes the only language that predators understand is the language of fear." Aura's antennae moved in patterns that Ryle was beginning to understand. They showed agitation, but also something like respect. "You have changed the dynamics of power in this region of space," the commander said. "You understand what that means. The other apex species will want this technology. The coalition will face pressure from our rivals, and we will face internal pressure from those who wish to attempt to conquer humanity before you can improve your weapons further." "I understand," Ryle said. "Then you also understand that there is only one logical response for the coalition," Aura said slowly. "We cannot allow this weapon to be used against us. We cannot allow it to fall into the hands of our enemies, and we cannot afford to engage in a prolonged conflict with a species that possesses it. Therefore, the only viable option is to make humans our allies instead of our enemies." Ryle had not expected this. She had expected more threats, more attempts at negotiation. Instead, Aura was doing something that a predator rarely did. She was retreating to a position of safety. "What are you proposing?" Ryle asked cautiously. "A full alliance," Aura said. "That will recognize humanity as a protected species. Any aggression against human worlds will be treated as aggression against the coalition. In exchange, humanity will not use these weapons against and the technology will remain exclusively human property." It was a stunning reversal. Ryle could hardly believe what she was hearing, but she understood what had driven Aura to this conclusion. The commander had faced a threat that she could not overcome through strength or numbers. Her predatory instincts had recognized something that her rational mind had been forced to acknowledge. Humanity was no longer something to be conquered. Humanity was something to be feared. "I will need to consult with our leadership," Ryle said carefully. "Of course," Aura replied. "But understand this, Ryle of humanity. What you have accomplished here goes beyond military advantage. You have created something that reaches into the very depths of what it means to be a predator. You have shown the galaxy that evolution has produced many forms of strength, and that physical might is only one of them. They have ruled through dominance for 50,000 years. We have never considered that there might be something stronger than us, something that we could not overcome through aggression and will. That is what your weapon has done. That is why we fear it. That is why we must respect the species that created it." As Ryle left the chamber, she understood that she had just witnessed something remarkable. She had watched one of the galaxy's most powerful species reorganize its entire understanding of humanity in the span of a few hours. The weapon had done more than demonstrate a military capability. It had forced them to confront a fundamental truth. The universe was not a simple hierarchy of strength and weakness. It was something far more complex, far more terrifying, and far more interesting than anyone had believed. News travels fast in space, and news of power travels even faster. Within days of the agreement between humanity and the Coalition, every delegation on Meridian 7 was demanding answers. The gossip had spread through the station like a biological virus. Humans possessed a weapon that frightened them. Humans possessed technology that bypassed conventional defenses. Humans, a young species barely 1,000 years into space exploration, had somehow become relevant in the games of power that the ancient species had been playing for eons. In the station's diplomatic corridor, species from across the known galaxy gathered to discuss the implications. The representatives, a species of silicon-based hive minds, requested meetings with the human delegation. The OKs, who prided themselves on their physical strength and martial prowess, sent inquiries about whether humans were interested in trade agreements. Even the mysterious, a species that rarely interacted with anyone, transmitted a formal message requesting contact with Ryle. O worked frantically to manage the flood of requests. His office had become a command center, with displays showing communication requests from dozens of different species. His face showed the strain of trying to represent humanity's interests while maintaining the careful balance of not offending anyone. "This is what power looks like," he said to Ryle during one of their brief private conversations. "Not just military strength, but the kind of power that makes others want to know you, want to work with you, want to ensure that you remain in their alliance rather than against them." Ryle nodded silently. She understood what had happened. The weapon had not just changed this perception of humanity. It had changed the perception of every species in the galaxy. Humanity was no longer the young upstart. Humanity was no longer something to be taken advantage of. Humanity was something that required careful consideration and respect. But with this new power came new responsibility, and Ryle felt the weight of it pressing down on her constantly. The formal ceremonies took place in the station's Grand Hall, a massive space designed to accommodate the largest diplomatic gatherings. Representatives from 100 different species attended. The delegation stood prominently, and when Ara made the announcement of the alliance, the reaction rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. "The Coalition recognizes humanity as a full ally and partner," the commander declared, her voice resonant and powerful. "Any aggression against human interests will be treated as aggression against the Coalition itself. This is not negotiable." The weight of those words was enormous. They were not just offering protection. They were offering to back humanity with their military might. And more than that, they were offering something that no other species in the region had been able to achieve: guaranteed safety from conquest. Ryle stood to the side during the ceremony, watching as her species was elevated to a status they had never expected to achieve. She saw the looks on the faces of the other delegations, the calculation happening behind every alien eye. What did this mean for their own security? What did it mean that who had never formally allied with anyone, were now declaring themselves humanity's protectors? The real turning point came when the OK's delegation approached O immediately after the ceremony. Their leader was a massive creature with 4 thick legs and a body covered in natural armor. The OKs had built their empire on the belief that physical strength was the only thing that mattered in the universe. "We wish to discuss an alliance with your people," the OK's leader said. "The possession of weapons that attack biological systems represents a significant advancement in military technology. We would be interested in understanding more about your capabilities." O carefully explained that humanity was not interested in selling technology or engaging in military competition. But he also made clear that humanity was interested in establishing trade relationships and cultural exchanges with species that respected their sovereignty. Within a week, the first trade agreements were being drafted. Within 2 weeks, 3 additional species had formally requested recognition as human trading partners. Within a month, the political landscape of the entire region had shifted. Ryle found herself in a position that she had never anticipated. She was no longer just a scientist. She had become a symbol. Other species wanted to meet her, to understand how her mind worked, to perhaps gain insight into what kind of innovations might come from a species that thought so differently about warfare and defense. She attended countless diplomatic functions, answered innumerable questions, and carefully explained the principles of harmonic resonance to audiences that ranged from grateful to skeptical. Some species wanted to work with humanity because they respected the innovation. Others wanted to work with humanity because they were afraid of what humanity might do if they did not. Ryle preferred the respect, but she understood that fear was also a form of motivation. On the station, production of the harmonic weapons began. Ryle insisted on personally overseeing every single device that was created. She would not allow the technology to fall into the wrong hands, and she would not allow copies to be made without her explicit approval. The weapons were stored in secure vaults that only human personnel could access. One evening, as Ryle stood in the observation chamber looking out at the stars, Minna and Ho found her there. They stood in comfortable silence for several moments, watching the cosmic display. "Do you regret it?" Minna asked finally, "creating the weapon?" Ryle considered the question carefully. Did she regret it? Regret implied a desire to change the past, but Ryle did not wish to change the past. She had done what was necessary. She had given her species the tools they needed to survive in a universe that had been rapidly leaving them behind. "No," she said finally, "I do not regret it, but I am aware that I have created something that cannot be undone. The galaxy will never return to the way it was before these weapons existed. That is both a burden and a responsibility." "And what of the future?" Ho asked. "What comes next?" Ra'el smiled slightly. "That depends on whether we use this power wisely. The weapon was created to protect. The question now is whether humanity has the wisdom to use that protection for purposes greater than mere survival." Behind them, the harmonic resonance chambers continued their work, calibrating new weapons and refining the mathematics of power. Ra'el had changed the course of human history with her innovation. Now, she would have to live with the consequences of that change, and hope that humanity would prove worthy of the power she had given them. Earth looked exactly as Ryle remembered it, which somehow seemed wrong. The planet rotated beneath her spacecraft as she approached, its blue oceans and green continents beautiful and familiar. Yet so much had changed since she had left. Humanity had changed, and she had been the catalyst for that change. The reception she received was overwhelming. When her shuttle touched down at the governmental complex, thousands of people had gathered. Some had come to celebrate what she had accomplished. Others had come because they wanted to see the person who had single-handedly elevated humanity from the status of a minor species to one that commanded respect throughout the galaxy. Ryle found it all somewhat uncomfortable. She was a scientist, not a public figure. She had created the weapon not for glory, but because it was necessary. Yet here she was, being treated like a hero, like someone who had accomplished something miraculous. The government officials were different. They moved quickly to implement Ryle's recommendations about weapons production and distribution. The harmonic weapon technology would remain strictly controlled. Production would be limited. Sales to other species would be absolutely forbidden. Every single weapon would carry safeguards and security protocols that only humans could understand. Within 3 months, humanity had established permanent military outposts in strategic locations throughout their region of space. Each outpost carried weapons capable of defending against any conventional assault. The message was clear. Humanity could no longer be conquered. Humanity could no longer be treated as a lesser species. But Ryle knew that the true victory was not military at all. 6 months after her return to Earth, she received a formal invitation to address the United Worlds Coalition, the governing body that represented all of humanity. World leaders from every continent gathered to listen to her speak. She walked onto the stage, her figure small against the vast amphitheater, and faced the sea of attentive faces. "Weapon I created was born from necessity," she said, her voice measured and calm. "Our species faced a choice. We could have continued as we were, asking for crumbs from the tables of more powerful species, hoping that they would treat us with kindness. Or we could have taken responsibility for our own survival. I chose the second path. I chose to believe that humanity possessed within it the capacity to create something new, something innovative, something that would force the galaxy to see us as we truly are." She paused, looking out at the assembly. "But the weapon is only the beginning. What matters now is what we do with the respect that we have earned. We earned it not through conquest, not through dominance, not through spreading fear and destruction. We earned it through intelligence, through understanding our enemy's vulnerabilities, through refusing to accept the role that others had assigned us. That is the true strength of humanity. That is what will carry us forward." The speech was recorded and transmitted across the galaxy. Within weeks, it had been viewed by billions of individuals from hundreds of different species. Some praised it, others criticized it, but more importantly, it established Ryle not just as a weapons designer, but as a thinker and a philosopher. 3 years later, Ryle stood in her laboratory on Earth, surrounded by new crystalline devices. The weapons had evolved. The original design had been refined, improved, and modified. She had trained a team of young scientists to understand the principles of harmonic resonance. Together, they worked on developing new applications for the technology that went beyond weapons. Minna had returned to Earth as well. She now headed the research division, overseeing a team of the minds that humanity had produced. Ho had been promoted to lead Earth security forces, a position that carried enormous responsibility. O had become the chief diplomatic representative to the Galactic Council. It was O who arrived at the laboratory one afternoon with news that made Ryle smile for the first time in months. "They have submitted a petition to join the Human Alliance Network," he said, his voice carrying a note of satisfaction. "The OKs have followed. 3 other species have indicated that they will do the same. Ryle, we are building something. We are creating a coalition of species that respects innovation and intelligence over brute force and dominance." Ryle nodded slowly. This was what she had hoped for, though she had never explicitly stated it. The weapon had been the tool, but the true goal had always been to create space, literally and figuratively, where different species could coexist as equals, where intelligence and innovation were valued more highly than physical dominance. And though she asked, "Ara has been remarkably supportive," O replied. "Her command has maintained their alliance with us, and they have actively discouraged any other species from attempting military aggression against human interests. It appears that the predator instincts that your weapon triggered have created a lasting impression. They consider themselves our protectors now, rather than our potential conquerors." That evening, Ryle stood alone in her laboratory, looking at the new harmonic devices. They were beautiful in their way, geometric and crystalline, catching the light like pieces of art. But they were so much more than that. They were the physical manifestation of human innovation, of the refusal to accept limitations, of the determination to survive and thrive in a universe that had been indifferent to human existence. She thought back to that moment in the negotiation chamber when had collapsed to the ground, when Ara's fear had become visible in her compound eyes. In that moment, everything had changed. Humanity had transformed from a species that asked permission to a species that commanded respect. Ryle began to work on the design. This version would combine harmonic resonance with quantum principles, creating something entirely new. She did not know what it would become or what capabilities it would possess. But that was the point. That was what it meant to innovate, to push forward into the unknown, to believe that human intelligence could create solutions to problems that no one else had even considered. In space stations throughout the galaxy, other species heard reports about the new weapons being developed by humanity. They updated their defensive capabilities. They strengthened their alliances with human partners. They began to understand, gradually, that humanity had become something that could not be ignored, something that could not be conquered, something that could not be controlled. Humanity had become a true power in the galaxy, not through military might alone, but through the power of innovation, through the power of understanding, through the power of creating solutions that transcended conventional thinking. Ryle looked up from her work as the sun began to set outside her laboratory window. Earth stretched out below her, beautiful and peaceful. Somewhere out there, in the vastness of space, other species were watching humanity's progress with a mixture of respect, fear, and curiosity. And all of it had begun with a small woman and a crystalline device that looked like art, but carried the weight of transformation. Humanity was no longer primitive. Humanity was no longer harmless. Humanity had become the galaxy's most interesting species, the one that nobody could predict, the one that solved problems in ways that others had never imagined. The age of human dominance had begun, not through conquest, but through innovation. And Rael had lit the spark that would burn for generations to come.